You don't need to dig up an ancient cemetery or stumble upon a mass grave in some desolate field. The evidence for one of the most horrifying genocides in human history lies right inside your body. In every cell, every drop of blood, every strand of DNA, science has uncovered a secret so shocking it left the research world speechless. Around 7,000 years ago, humanity went through an unprecedented purge, one that targeted men. Specifically, by analyzing millions of modern genetic sequences, scientists discovered clear signs of a genetic bottleneck, a moment in evolution where the number of individuals in a population plummets drastically. But here's the twist: only the Y chromosome was affected. That's the type of gene carried only by men, passed from father to son. And during that era, it almost vanished from the genetic map. Meanwhile, mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down through mothers, remained virtually unchanged. This means one thing: women survived while men were nearly wiped out. According to estimates, up to 95% of all men across Asia, Europe, and the Middle East may have died, been killed, or disappeared in just a few generations. A global-scale catastrophe, one that unfolded before the first word of history was ever written. And yet, no chronicle, no scroll, no legend has ever recorded it. What could have caused such a calamity? An invisible pandemic? A mega volcano? A planet-wide massacre? Or maybe humans did it to themselves? And the most haunting question of all remains: why only the men? The answer might lie scattered in ancient graves, in the marks of weapons etched into shattered skulls, or in forgotten villages where every resident was eaten. To find the truth, we must go back to a time when human darkness reached its peak. Part 2: The Bones That Scream the Truth. If DNA is the whisper of the past, then bones are its scream. And when archaeologists began digging into the earth, they didn't just uncover artifacts. They heard that scream echo across millennia. This wasn't a random killing, not the remains of some long-lost warrior culture. It was a bloody era, from beginning to end. In Europe alone, scientists have confirmed over 250 mass grave sites from the Neolithic period. Most contain the skeletons of people who once lived in the very first settled communities. But what's most chilling? They didn't die of old age. A study of more than 2,300 individuals revealed that 10 to 23% showed signs of violent trauma, fractured bones from blunt force, piercing arrow wounds, and deep blade cuts to the skull. And within those numbers, men were the primary targets. Many of them not just attacked once, but multiple times. Some bodies bore both healed and fresh wounds, proof that they had survived previous battles only to be killed in the next one. A single skeleton can say more than 1,000 pages of history. And these bones all tell the same tale. They were hunted, they were killed, and they were shown no mercy. But even so, what we've found might only be the tip of the iceberg. Because not all fatal wounds leave marks on bone. Many may have died from soft tissue injuries, from infection, from blood loss after the attack. And then there are the ones we'll never find. Those who were burned, buried in yet unexcavated land, or left to rot in wild forests. Which is why what we have uncovered so far may be nothing more than the overture to a symphony of genocide. Make no mistake, what happened during the Neolithic wasn't coincidence. It was a pattern, a system, a bloodlust that spread through early civilizations like wildfire. But who were the perpetrators, and why did they kill? The answers lie in two villages, where men were erased, women were taken, and children beheaded. Talheim and Schlitz. Next episode, where brutality takes form. Part 3, Talheim and Schlitz, the death of men. Welcome to Talheim, a small village in ancient Germany. No stone walls, no fortress towers, just 34 people, all slaughtered and buried together in a single pit. And not peacefully. Every single one of them had been struck in the head. No signs of resistance, no broken arms, no defensive wounds, no struggle. They were ambushed, executed, massacred, most likely while trying to flee. One chilling detail: young women were not among the dead, not because they were lucky, but because they were taken, spared not out of mercy, but because they were seen as trophies or reproductive property for the victors. Now shift your gaze southeast to Schletz, Austria, another village, same era, but here, the horror escalates. Over 200 bodies were found in a mass grave, but this time they were not whole. Skulls split in half. Some skulls were even twisted, crushed, as if the killers were looking for something inside, or simply pushing the cruelty to its most savage extreme. And again, young women were missing. Once more, they vanished, just like in Talheim, while the men and boys lay broken in the earth. Both villages share a disturbing pattern. Tall wooden palisades surrounded them. Early attempts at defense. Both were attacked from the outside, not for wealth or food, but with the clear goal of wiping out their people entirely. This wasn't warfare for survival. This wasn't a raid for resources. This was genetic erasure, bloodline cleansing, a form of prehistoric genocide. And when you zoom out, the names begin to connect: Talheim, Schletz, Kilianstetten, forming a map of blood spreading across Neolithic Europe. But what happens when murder evolves beyond revenge, beyond rivalry? What happens when people kill not for necessity, but for ritual? When death itself is worshipped? Brace yourself for the next chapter, Herxheim, where human bones were cooked, brains devoured, and skulls turned into decorations. Part 4. Herxheim, Kingdom of the Cannibals. If Talheim and Schletz are symbols of war, then Herxheim is the symbol of something far darker: the complete loss of humanity. Located in what is now Western Germany, Herxheim was a Neolithic village spanning over 15 hectares, unusually large for a primitive farming community. But what's truly strange is this: Herxheim wasn't attacked. It was the attacker. When archaeologists excavated the area, they didn't just find a few graves. They uncovered at least 80 mass burial pits containing the remains of over 1,000 individuals, possibly up to 1,500. From infants to elders, no one was spared. But what turned Herxheim into an archaeological nightmare was the way these bodies had been treated. Skulls split cleanly down the middle, marrow extracted from broken long bones, tongues cut out, flesh scraped from the face, smaller bones crushed to reach the spinal marrow. Parts of the bodies were roasted and showed clear signs of being eaten. This was no longer war. This was ritual, and it appears the entire community of Herxheim took part. Split skulls were lined up along the village entrance, like a blood-drenched welcome for any who dared enter. Bones were filed down, drilled and fashioned into decorations, drinking vessels, or charms. There's evidence that certain parts, tongues, brains, marrow, were specifically prioritized, perhaps for their spiritual significance or flavor. And here's the most chilling part: most of the victims were not from Herxheim. They came from mountains, valleys, and plains, representing a variety of distant cultures, some living hundreds of kilometers away. Some were farmers, others hunters. Some may have simply been travelers who wandered too close, which means Herxheim didn't just kill their own. They hunted people, dragged the bodies back, and performed ceremonial acts upon them. Researchers have called this place a skull cult, a prehistoric sect that worshipped heads, consumed human flesh, and turned death into ritual. And then they vanished. Just decades after the peak of the carnage, the village was abandoned. No one knows why. Revenge, disease, collapse from within? But the skull pits remain, whispering of a time when cannibalism was belief. And if you think Herxheim was just an isolated madness, wait for what comes next, because the entire society of that era may have been wired to erase men from existence. Part 5. Why were only men wiped out? A pandemic does not discriminate between genders. A volcanic eruption does not choose its victims. A natural disaster would wipe out both men and women without exception. So why is it that around 7,000 years ago, 95% of males across Asia, Europe, and the Middle East suddenly vanished, while women continued to survive and reproduce? This question has baffled scientists for years, and one of the most controversial theories traces its roots back to human society itself. After the agricultural revolution, when people began settling down in permanent communities, a new social structure emerged, the patrilineal clan. In this system, only men of shared bloodlines were accepted into a group. Any other man, no matter how peaceful or harmless, was seen as a potential threat. Why? Because in a world with no police, no courts, no laws, blood was the only form of trust. If you weren't my brother, you were my enemy. The result? Men from outside the group were eliminated without hesitation, not because they had done wrong, but simply because they carried the wrong genes. Women, on the other hand, were not treated the same way. Quite the opposite. They were traded, married off, or taken as spoils during intergroup conflicts. In the eyes of these patrilineal societies, women were reproductive resources, transferable, reusable, and so the outcome was this. Outgroup males were removed en masse. Women were kept alive and passed on their genes through the maternal line. That's why, when scientists examine the DNA from this era, they find a collapse in Y chromosome diversity because the men were killed. Mitochondrial DNA remained stable because the women survived. In that brutal equation, it seems human evolution wasn't driven by cooperation, but by targeted genetic cleansing. But is that the whole story? Was it all just blood and violence? Maybe there's another explanation, a quieter one, yet no less terrifying. Next episode, when men disappeared not by the blade, but by the bloodline itself. Part 6, not just violence. The peaceful theory. Not everyone believes that human history was soaked in blood and blades. Not every scientist looks back and sees only split skulls and corpses in mass graves. Some, working with the same genetic data, have proposed a very different theory, that perhaps men didn't disappear because they were killed, but because they were forgotten. This theory is called lineal fission, or the fragmentation of male bloodlines. In Neolithic patrilineal societies, closely related men lived together, sharing land, resources, even wives. But over time, these larger groups broke apart, splitting into smaller clans seeking new places to settle. And at that moment, genetic chance began to intervene. Some groups produced many sons, and their Y chromosome lineages spread widely. Others, for any number of reasons, failed to reproduce male heirs, or their sons died young from disease, famine, or drought. No one killed them. They simply were never born again. As centuries passed, certain Y chromosome lines faded away, not in battle, but in silence. Combine this with climate change, crop failures, and epidemics, and you get a genetic bottleneck. No sword or spear required. And perhaps, like so many historical mysteries, the truth lies somewhere in between. Violence happened, massacres were real, but they were not the whole story. Because humanity doesn't just destroy with stone axes, we also erase with the invisible choices of evolution. Maybe at that moment, human society was trying to become a society, awkwardly, chaotically, instinctively, and the forgotten bloodlines, they were the first cost of civilization. Next episode, why did the agricultural revolution, the dawn of civilization, also spark an age of genocide? Part 7, the rise of agricultural warfare. History is full of cruel ironies, and one of its greatest twists was the agricultural revolution. Around 10,000 years ago, humanity abandoned its nomadic hunting lifestyle to settle down, plant crops, and raise animals. It sounded like a miracle, a leap forward for civilization. But that very stability invited instability. When you build a village, You don't just create a home, you raise a flag over your resources. When you store food, you're not just feeding yourself, you're tempting the hunger of others. When you have fields, livestock, pottery, and women, you don't just have possessions, you become a target. In a world without borders or laws, the mere presence of a neighbor could be seen as a threat to survival, not because they were evil, but because they could take everything you have. And so war was born. Not from hatred, not from honor, but from opportunity. A village full of food and women was more tempting than any herd of deer. And unlike hunting, raiding a village was a guaranteed reward if you won. Over thousands of years, violence became strategy. What began as scattered raids evolved into calculated campaigns. Humanity learned the formula: kill the men, keep the women, burn the homes, steal the grain, tear down the walls, take the land. And who bore the brunt of this economic warfare? Adult men. They weren't just the fighters. They were the defenders of bloodlines, the reproductive rivals, the ones who might strike back. And if you eliminated all of them, you didn't just win the battle, you won the genetic war. The Neolithic world was no longer a land of wandering tribes. It became a vast arena where bloodlines competed like corporations, and war became a survival strategy. In that brutal arena, who survived and who disappeared? The answer lies in the final chapter, when the darkness recedes and the legacy of that nightmare still pulses in our blood. Part 8. The Aftermath, a legacy written in our genes. The world today seems to have turned a new page. We have laws, human rights charters, international organizations, peace treaties. But let's not forget, the blood in our veins is a replica of a much darker past. War still exists. Humans still kill each other. But never again, not since the Neolithic, has destruction been so systematic, so dehumanized. Back then, there were no front lines, no prisoners, no Geneva Convention. There was only one law: kill to live, or kill to erase a bloodline. Thanks to the rise of trade, language, and legal systems, we've slowly broken the cycle of inherited hatred. We've learned to live with difference rather than destroy it. But not everything has returned. Something is lost, forever. Thousands, maybe millions of Y chromosome lineages wiped from human history. Distant relatives never met. Branches of ancestry never grown. Faces, voices, eyes, never to be seen again. The Y chromosome, once as diverse as a primordial forest, is now a barren garden with only a few lucky strands surviving. And if you are a man watching this video, breathing, walking, observing the world, know this: you are the descendant of the few who survived a nameless genocide. No monuments were built for them, no names recorded in history. But if they hadn't endured, you wouldn't be here. You are living proof of a time when humanity nearly erased itself. And that legacy still lives on, burning quietly in your DNA, like an unspoken memory. A reminder that evolution is not just nature's work. It is shaped by the cruel choices humans made against their own kind. Today, you don't have to live behind wooden walls, don't have to guard the fire at night, or hide your children in a pit. You no longer fear that strangers might break in with axes, slaughter the men, and take the women. But that doesn't mean the past is gone. It's still here, in every cell, in every name we carry, in every unconscious decision etched into us by ancestral trauma. If you believe that history is not just what happened, but a mirror that reflects who we are today, if you believe that some stories, though forgotten, still deserve to be told, then subscribe to this channel. Join us on a journey to uncover the buried memories, the truths once hidden beneath dust, bones, and blood. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because the past was never silent. It's just waiting to be heard.